What if Darth Maul was redeemed?
The other Sith I fought were full of hatred and arrogance. In you, I sense regret.
My only passions are integrity and honor. I welcome the end of your kind.
Whatever you've been told about us, it's a lie. We'd gladly stop fighting if it meant genuine peace.
I like to believe that, but I know better. Come, let us end this. Die well, Jedi.
What would happen if the fallen apprentice to Darth Sidious was saved during the Clone Wars? What if Anakin Skywalker turned him to the light? And what now? Having first met Anakin Skywalker amongst the sprawled desert and endless dunes of Tatooine, such an encounter was one of fate, carrying two messages: the return of the Sith and the intrigue of Anakin. Nearly killed in this encounter and saved by the quick-witted speech of Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn, the face that stalked him was one of nightmares, baked and burning bright red, but also caked and coated by layers of blackened tattoos. Skipping past their eventual escape from this ambush and glossing over the death of Master Qui-Gon, one remaining factor would be trauma. First envy and joy at the belated sight of warriors wielding sabers of light, but eventually turning to remorse and regret once news and knowledge of Qui-Gon's death first struck Anakin, the first in a long line of failures that he would always blame upon himself. Finally erupting in an emotional burst, not from him, but the very Force itself, detailed and outlined both in the Jedi Quest novels and the comics based off of them. Basically, 13 years old at this point in George's timeline, Anakin's training would finally reach that which he considered his own beginning, the moment when his Jedi Master, Obi-Wan Kenobi, first brought him to the sacred planet of Ilum, not just to freeze, jitter, or shake, but to enter the cliffside caves made of solid ice and slippery chunks of snow older than decades, never melting and never warm. The sole source of comfort for any to find here was only through the Force. Essentially speaking these same words to his Padawan, after both master and apprentice scaled a mountain too tall to tell, his next words were ones of warning, cautioning his student about what the Force might show him. Visions from the future, yes, but also memories from the past, voices and trials that over 1,000 generations of Jedi before him had all undertaken, facing not just something that those around him would casually know about, but instead his deepest secrets. Gifting Anakin the hilt and the other components he previously worked on, the shortest of strolls inside brought them to an ethereal wall of writing. History, scribbled, sprawled, and spread across the caved walls of Ilum, but holding no value to the boy in front of them. Instead, he would pivot and turn the nearest corner, only for the pinged repetition of a jingling bell tossed and thrown from the shadows to interrupt him. Shadows that swiftly shifted to form and shape his own mirror image, barely 3 years younger. Struck on his foot before the metallic bell itself imploded like the slashed wound from a gushing throat, eyes were closed in an instant, before taking several seconds to open, worried at first, but finding comfort when he noticed nothing was there. At least the bell, the boy before him, and the blood on him wasn't there, but someone new now else was. His mother, running from the dark, snatched and snagged by a figure that could only be called an abomination, a fiend of the dark side, and a spirit. Rushing to kill, despite his age and what should have been innocence, Anakin ended up punching nothing but a crystal-laden wall of yellow, glowing as bright as the stars and obscuring what was once as clear as day. Only then would Anakin realize his new position amongst the cave itself, delving deeper than he thought and losing himself to his emotions, an engagement that his own master, still watching from afar, would openly encourage. However, the second that Obi-Wan stopped speaking, the moment that Skywalker closed his eyes, another voice joined in once again, the very voice thought slain, but never before heard. Until now, another vision from the Force, the arrival and appearance of Darth Maul, started first and foremost by mocking the Jedi youngling in front of him, swiftly changing pace to speak ill of the same master he slew before dying, igniting the passion-filled response that he sought and seeked. This mirage of the Dark Lord effortlessly pushed aside Anakin's training lightsaber, and in the comic itself, the very idea of who ends up building his actual lightsaber is left up to interpretation. Did Anakin, in his rust panic, and after dropping the bag moments prior, rush through its construction within the span of seconds? Or did the apparition of Darth Maul construct it for him as a gift and a test? This question will always be left up to interpretation, doing what Sith do best, and asking his foe why they themselves would deny the dark side. Maul's mockery finally reached its limit, triggering the eruption of Darth Maul's twin saber. Yes, but so too the freshly manipulated construction of Anakin's own lightsaber for the first time. While the following battle was obviously nothing more than a test from the Force, it's worth noting these battling titans are basically 10 years separate from the other, and Anakin's young age was the sole and singular thing holding him back. Continuously mocked and belittled without end, Maul made a point to mention Anakin's own lust mere moments prior, when he openly desired to kill the very spirit that kidnapped his mother, the same mother still living now. Then and there, Anakin would proclaim himself a Jedi. He would pronounce his goal to let go of his anger and to abandon the path towards power, earning yet another set and lined onslaught of mockery from the Sith Lord beyond him, never verbally finding the chance to respond towards that which he could use instead of power. Only his will could muster the answer, the idea that Anakin's own nightmares summoned Darth Maul, so they too could rid and wipe him from existence. And while yes, Anakin would go on to fully banish this attacking mirage of a Dark Lord, Darth Maul's final words warned of his return. A return that, depending on which comics you personally prefer, would go on to contribute towards his 4 deaths. And yes, I did say 4. Darth Maul is one of those characters that repeatedly comes back over and over just to die again. While he might be incredibly obscure, only appearing in one of the 6 movies and not having one single line in the TV show, his strength actually comes from his dozens upon dozens, if not nearly 100 appearances across comics, games, and novels. This 1,000-word rant allows me to finally address the context of this video's premise, and the only reason I'm posting this to begin with. What if Darth Maul, after his initial fall to the dark side, was redeemed? Redeeming him before his 4th death to Luke Skywalker would, in my opinion, be a fate worse than death, nothing more than a brain and a spine at this point. Redeeming him before his third death to Darth Vader would, by itself, be a massive point of debate. Many in the Star Wars community do not consider this appearance of Darth Maul to be real, but I do. I believe the prophets of the dark side, all working together, didn't resurrect Darth Maul, but found his spirit and fashioned it into a recreated body. Of course, a lot of this is just my own headcanon, partially because so few people care about original Star Wars nowadays, but mainly it's because I'm so determined and passionate about having a precise and accurate timeline. And even then, after Darth Maul's second death, Obi-Wan Kenobi burns his body to ash amongst the dune sea of Tatooine. So the prophets of the dark side wouldn't have a physical body to resurrect in the first place. Skipping over all of these retcons and convoluted statements about the lore, I personally think the best time to redeem Darth Maul is after his first death, but before his second death. This leads us to our first major change in the timeline. This specific panel in the Star Wars Old Wounds comic, from Visionaries, and the sheer drastic implications that every single picture across this page paints. This very panel is, in fact, the reason why so many in the original Star Wars community disregard this comic, because of how drastically it breaks the timeline. What I mean is, this comic implies Darth Maul re-emerged during the Clone Wars, something that never happened in George's original timeline. But that fated and fabled implication will happen now in our timeline, holding onto the assumption that Darth Maul really was tracking Obi-Wan, tracing and chasing this Jedi Master and his Padawan to the chaotic planet of Jabim. With the battle itself lasting roughly 43 days, maybe 44 if you count the final night, the exact date of Obi-Wan's death is never given, but dates from Republic 56 allow us to pinpoint that he disappeared sometime before the 28th day of the planetary siege, and afterwards, the only thing that held the Republic and their efforts together on this planet was, in my opinion, Anakin Skywalker. Leading to our next change, the arrival of the 39th day and the deaths of Jedi General Narkuna and Leska. Pulling from the past implications of the Old Wound comic, as stated earlier, and the idea that Darth Maul was following them, let's say that Darth Maul himself, half Zabrak and half droid at this point, would appear now. Holding on to the original interpretation of Darth Maul, meaning we have to partially disregard the Darth Plagueis novel, because the idea that Darth Maul was just an assassin, not a Dark Lord of the Sith, first originated from this novel. But condensing all of this down in an attempt to stop wasting your time, I only mention any of this in order to give better context. The context being that Darth Maul, before the Darth Plagueis novel, is implied to know about his master's secret. And in Star Wars Tales 9, Hate Leads the Lollipops, a child Darth Maul is saved by Palpatine, openly presenting himself as a senator. While yes, this specific comic does have conflicting timelines with the Star Wars Tales 24 comic, marked as well as showing Maul with his Sith tattoos as a child. I personally believe these tattoos existing in this comic are just a side effect of the disgusting art style and the artist not understanding Darth Maul's lore. With all of this held close to our memories, the following confrontation between Maul and Anakin would erupt under torrents of rain. Now fully grown up, and interrupting not just Anakin's departure from Cobalt Station, but also the siege from the Confederacy that swiftly followed. Having timed such a delayed attack, not on purpose, but mistake, as Maul's first desire was to draw out and strike down Obi-Wan Kenobi. He also refused to contact his former master until such a foe was confirmed dead. A death that, as implicated from the Republic 55 comic, had already happened, and the trauma from such a loss would haunt Anakin. Gritting teeth and jumping from the speeder he rode, soon slashed and destroyed, while his saber itself was ignited before flying towards his robotic hand. Taken back to the very battle we discussed at the beginning of this video, and the warning of Maul's return that the vision of old spoke then, their enacted swings were mirrored images from the past, except now the corrupt foe before him was very much real, unable to be wished or wilted away while stomping towards him, slashing and spinning with the fiercest of formed fighting styles. Juyo. Now, against any of the other 8 members belonging to the Padawan pack, such an act would have effortlessly won the first attempt, but not against Anakin Skywalker, he who was chosen by the Force, but too often controlled by his emotions. Still fresh from his master's fall, the severing of Maul's hilt came with the crack of thunder overhead and shouting clones in the distance. Saved not by Darth Sidious or the attacking droids of Jabim, but Anakin's own trepidation. Reminded of what he once spoke aloud towards the vision from old, the fact that he would let go of his anger in the idea that he was a Jedi, the act of killing his foe while unarmed went against everything he was taught. Even when taunted by tainted speech and spewed insults about not just his current master, but the first and former one, long since slain, he still stood stalwart, reaching only such a point when, while he couldn't kill, Anakin could still strike, smashing the back-ended edge of his lightsaber's hilt against Maul's skull with enough force to finish anyone normal. The Sith training he received was the only thing that kept him alive. Knocked unconscious amongst the battlefield as blaster bolts shot past his mud-covered body. From here, the planned evacuation of Anakin from Jabim would never unfold. Not when bogged down by Maul. Not when the cried screams from Cobalt Station were still so close. And not when Jedi Padawan Tay came closer to his own death. Unwilling to leave alone, despite the imparted orders from Chancellor Palpatine, all he could do was rally back towards his friends, to regroup with the Padawan pack, and to hope that Darth Maul himself would stay asleep for as long as possible. Going beyond just some simple attempt to push off the end, let's say that here, in our timeline, Anakin sought to seek and please both sides. Let's say that Anakin, overwhelmed by the sudden reappearance of Darth Maul, like his vision of old after so recently losing his master, would desire knowledge from the Council, viewed not as an accident, but a message from the Force, sending Maul in the place where his master stood so recently. All of which combined would lead to the greatest change of our entire story, the act of Anakin taking full command of the Padawan pack, not just in ceremony, but practice as well, directing the other Jedi to fully evacuate with him, to abandon Jabim despite their orders, and giving our video the premise of 3 things that would be changed. Darth Maul's emergence and capture on Jabim, the evacuation of all 9 Padawan pack members, and the regrouping of everyone on one singular planet, New Hostis, a decision and outcome that only future episodes will be able to fully foretell.